The morning sun hung lazily over the busy streets of Enugu, a city alive with the hum of commerce and chaos. Car horns blared, hawkers shouted their wares, and keiki drivers wove dangerously through thick traffic. It was a scene common to many Nigerian cities, vibrant yet unforgiving, especially to those on the fringes of society. At the heart of the main roundabout near the old timber market, a young woman crouched on the pavement, her tattered wrapper wrapped tightly around her slender frame. Her skin, once smooth and glowing like sun-kissed bronze, now bore the wear of hardship. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes sunken, but what held most people's attention were the two children beside her, twin boys, no older than 6, their small arms wrapped around their mother as though she were both anchor and shield. She begged, quietly, not with the loud desperation of some, but with the quiet plea of someone who had once known dignity. "Madam, a beg?" "Small thing for my pekin," she said to a passerby who quickly averted his eyes and walked past. No one really looked at her. People seldom did. She was part of the scenery, like cracked concrete or potholes. Until that day, a black 2023 Range Rover Vogue pulled up nearby. The tinted glass rolled down slightly, and from within, a man in a navy blue agbada with golden embroidery looked out. His name was Chief Obinna Obidiki, a multi-millionaire entrepreneur who had risen from the ashes of poverty to become one of the wealthiest men in southeastern Nigeria. He was on his way to meet government officials about a new real estate project, but his gaze had frozen on the beggar woman. The children, the face, the posture. Something about her tugged violently at his memory. "Chief, are we good to go?" His assistant, Tony, asked from the passenger seat. Obinna didn't respond. He stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward the woman, ignoring the puzzled looks from people who recognized him from magazine covers and billboards. The woman didn't look up. She only extended her hand with a feeble whisper. "Please help my children." Obinna knelt slightly and removed his sunglasses. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, time collapsed. A choked gasp escaped her lips. She tried to look away, to hide her face, but it was too late. Obinna's voice cracked as he whispered, "Chiamaka." The woman froze. People around began to murmur. Some pulled out their phones, sensing something dramatic was unfolding. Obinna stared, heart pounding. It was her, Chiamaka, the woman he had once loved more than life itself. The woman who had vanished without a trace 7 years ago, the same year his world had begun to change for the better. He turned to the twins, staring at their eyes, deep brown like hers, with a spark that seemed hauntingly familiar. And then, before the stunned onlookers, he did the unthinkable. He fell to his knees in front of her and wept. Rain began to fall, slowly at first, then heavier, as if the heavens themselves were responding to the moment unfolding at the roundabout. People watched in stunned silence as Chief Obinna Obidiki, a man many considered untouchable, knelt before a beggar woman and her children, tears rolling freely down his cheeks. His body trembled with emotion, as though he had finally uncovered a missing piece of himself. "Obinna, please, don't do this here," Chiamaka said, barely audible, her voice heavy with shame. She tugged her sons close, trying to shield them from the attention. "Why, Chiamaka? Why did you disappear?" he asked hoarsely. "For 7 years, I searched. For 7 years I wondered if you were alive or dead." The rain was now soaking everyone, but neither of them cared. Obinna stood up slowly and gestured toward his car. "Come with me, you and the boys." She hesitated. Her lips parted, then closed again. The children looked up at their mother, uncertain but curious. "I can't, Obinna, I can't go with you, not like this," she said, glancing down at her torn wrapper, bare feet and weathered appearance. "You don't have a choice," he said, suddenly firm. "Not anymore. You owe me answers, and these boys—" He looked at them again. "They look like me. Are they mine?" She looked away. He turned to his assistant. "Tony, clear the back seat. Let them in." Tony, still dazed, nodded quickly. Reluctantly, Chiamaka rose to her feet. She held the twins' hands and followed Obinna into the car. Her body trembled, not just from the cold rain but from the storm raging within her. Memories, regrets, fear. The ride to Obinna's mansion in Independence Layout was silent. Inside the luxurious vehicle, Chiamaka couldn't stop looking at the leather seats, the air conditioning, the polished dashboard. Her sons, Emeka and Ebuka, sat quietly, clutching her hands. Obinna said nothing until they reached the gates of his estate, guarded by security personnel in black uniforms. The guards bowed in respect as the vehicle rolled in. Chiamaka's eyes widened. This was not just a house, it was a palace. Tall white walls, bronze lion statues, flower gardens manicured to perfection. Her breath caught in her throat. 7 years ago, they had both been struggling. She remembered them sleeping in a one-room face-me-I-face-you apartment. Now he lived like royalty. Inside, a maid rushed forward with towels. "Madam, let me help." Chiamaka instinctively recoiled, unused to kindness, Obinna noticed. "Let them help you," he said softly. "You're safe now." He ordered a meal to be prepared and had clean clothes brought for the boys. Then, once the children were bathed, clothed, and asleep in the guest room, he led Chiamaka to the living room. Now alone, he looked at her, really looked at her. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes heavy with unspoken pain, but there was still a trace of the beautiful woman he had once planned to marry. He sat down, elbows on his knees. "Talk," he said. "From the beginning." She took a deep breath, bracing herself. "Obinna, the day I disappeared, I was pregnant. I hadn't told you yet because you were struggling with debts, and I didn't want to burden you. That morning, I got a message. My younger sister in the village was sick. I rushed to the motor park and took the last bus to Nsukka. But on our way there, armed robbers attacked the bus. I was kidnapped." Obinna's eyes widened in horror. "I spent 2 years in a remote camp near the Benue border. Forced to cook and clean for criminals, they moved often. There was no escape. I gave birth in the bush, alone. No hospital, no help. Just God and the grace of the land." Tears streamed freely down her cheeks. "When I finally escaped, I had nothing. No ID, no money, no phone. I tried to return to Enugu, but everything had changed. You had moved. Our friends were gone. I became just another ghost." Obinna stood, overwhelmed. "And you never thought to go to the police or try radio, anything?" "I did, but no one believed me. I looked like a mad woman, a beggar. No one wanted to help, so I begged. For food, for shelter, for these children." He looked at her again, this time with awe and heartbreak. "You raised my children in the streets?" "No," she whispered. "I raised our children, and I don't want anything from you, Obinna. I just want them to have a better life." There was silence for a long moment. Then, Obinna walked to her slowly and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You'll have more than that, Chiamaka," he said quietly. "You'll have justice." The morning after that stormy night was unusually calm. Sunlight filtered gently through the tall windows of Obinna's palatial mansion. Chiamaka sat in the plush guest room, wrapped in a clean, floral-patterned robe. She had barely slept. Too many thoughts swirled through her mind. The past, the present, and a future she hadn't dared imagine. Obinna knocked gently before entering. He wore a crisp white kaftan, his demeanor calmer than the day before. "I didn't want to wake the boys. They looked peaceful," he said softly, sitting on the couch across from her. "They haven't had a mattress to sleep on in over a year," Chiamaka replied, her voice distant. "Even the ground was better than some of the shelters we stayed in." Obinna swallowed hard. He was a man used to commanding boardrooms and negotiating billion-naira contracts, yet nothing had prepared him for the guilt he now carried. "I've called my lawyers," he said. "We're going to investigate everything. The kidnapping, the bus robbery, the abandoned police reports. Whoever took you, if they're still alive, they'll face the full weight of the law." Chiamaka looked up sharply. "Obinna, don't stir the past. I've made peace with it." He shook his head firmly. "No, Chiamaka. You don't get to disappear for 7 years, return with my children, and expect me to do nothing. You survived a horror. That deserves more than peace. It deserves justice." There was a brief pause, then he added, "Besides, I want to clear your name." Chiamaka's brow furrowed. "My name?" Obinna exhaled. "When you vanished, people blamed you, said you ran off with another man. My friends laughed. My business rivals called me cursed. Even my own mother said you left me because I had nothing." Chiamaka's eyes welled with tears. "I didn't know. I nearly lost my mind," he confessed. "I buried myself in work. I made money, yes, but every success felt like a betrayal. I kept thinking, if only she were here to see this." He stood and began to pace. "I want the truth to come out. I want the world to know what happened. Not just for your sake or mine, but for Emeka and Ebuka. They deserve to know where they come from." Chiamaka stood slowly, her shoulders still tense. "And if the truth brings shame? If it puts a target on our backs?" He turned to her, eyes burning with determination. "Then let them come. I have lawyers, bodyguards, influence. All things I wish I had back then, but now I have them, and I have you." Chiamaka looked at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "All right," she said. "Let's do this." By the end of the week, Obinna had mobilized a private investigative team. Former police officers, cybersecurity experts, and a seasoned human rights lawyer named Barrister Madhu were brought on board. They began piecing together the puzzle, starting with transport records from that fateful day, old hospital logs, and statements from survivors of the same bus that was attacked. And then a breakthrough came. A surviving passenger named Ifeoma was tracked down in Jos. Her testimony confirmed that Chiamaka had been on the bus and had indeed disappeared after the robbery. She remembered Chiamaka screaming for help as she was dragged into the forest by armed men. Ifeoma's statement, along with newly uncovered police reports buried years ago, reopened the case. Barrister Madhu held a press conference, presenting evidence that exonerated Chiamaka. She was no longer the woman who ran away. She was now the woman who was taken. News headlines exploded. Millionaire's lost fiancé found after 7 years. The truth stuns Nigeria. Kidnapped survivor reunited with ex-fiancé. Raises twins in the streets. Justice for Chiamaka. Investigation into forgotten crimes begins. TV stations, bloggers, and influencers couldn't get enough. Obinna, known for his calm and stoic demeanor in public, broke into tears again during an NTA interview when asked about his sons. Meanwhile, an anonymous tip led to the arrest of 2 men, former gang members tied to the criminal network that had once held Chiamaka. A wider investigation into missing persons in southeastern Nigeria was launched. Late one night, Obinna sat alone in his private study, sipping palm wine and staring at a photo of the woman he'd once planned to marry, now a warrior who had survived and returned with his blood in her arms. Chiamaka walked in quietly, a wrapper around her waist and her natural hair tied in a bun. "They're asleep," she said. "Good," Obinna replied. She hesitated. "You've done so much. I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," he said, rising and walking toward her. "But I owed you everything." He paused, then added, "And I'm not done." 2 months had passed since the press conference that changed everything. Obinna's name was now associated with more than wealth. It was tied to justice, compassion, and unexpected redemption. But the biggest transformation of all was not what the media saw. It was the quiet rebirth taking place within Chiamaka. Once invisible, she now walked tall. Chiamaka was given full control of her narrative, and with Obinna's support she did not shy away from the spotlight. At a women's summit hosted in Abuja, she was invited as the keynote speaker under the theme, "From Silence to Strength, Stories That Inspire." Wearing a fitted Ankara gown, her natural beauty restored and her dignity resurrected, she stood before an audience of hundreds and told her story, not as a victim but as a survivor. "I lost my voice for years," she told them. "I was buried under shame, under poverty, under the silence of a world too busy to care. But I rose, not because I was strong, but because I chose not to give up for the sake of my sons." and because someone I loved refused to forget me. The hall erupted in applause. Social media lit up with clips of her speech. Hashtags like "Justice for Chiamaka and never forget" her trended across Nigeria. Obinna watched all of this quietly from the side. He no longer felt the anger or heartbreak that once consumed him. He felt something else. Hope. But not everyone was happy. In the shadows of Enugu's political underbelly, Chiamaka's sudden reappearance and the reopening of the cold case brought discomfort to certain powerful figures. The kidnapping syndicate she had escaped from? They were once loosely affiliated with a smuggling ring that had protection from high-ranking individuals. Now, Chiamaka's testimony had become a ticking time bomb. A letter arrived one evening, no return address, only a threat. Tell her to stop talking or she won't live to say another word. Obinna read it with a straight face. Then he called Barrister Madhu and doubled Chiamaka's security detail. "She's not going to hide again," he told the lawyer. "This time we protect her." Chiamaka, when told about the threat, simply nodded. "Let them come," she said quietly. "I'm not afraid." A few weeks later, Obinna threw a private dinner in his mansion. He invited close friends, family, and a few journalists. He had something important to announce. Chiamaka stood beside him, dressed in a wine-red lace gown, while the twins, now glowing in neat caftans, stood proudly at her feet. "I've built companies, estates, and legacies," Obinna began, "but none of it compares to what I almost lost. 7 years ago I lost the love of my life and didn't even know why. I thought she abandoned me, but the truth was far worse, and more powerful." He turned to Chiamaka. "This woman was taken from me. She survived unspeakable things. And, through it all, she raised 2 kings." The guest clapped softly. Obinna took a deep breath. "And so today I want to do something long overdue. Something I should have done years ago." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Gasps erupted. Chiamaka froze. Obinna knelt down, not for the cameras, not for show, but with sincerity burning in his eyes. "Chiamaka, will you marry me? Not just as the mother of my sons, not just as a woman I loved, but as the woman who never gave up, who inspires me to be better every single day?" Tears welled up in her eyes, not because she didn't expect it, but because it was real, public, and whole. "Yes," she whispered, 1,000 times yes. The room burst into applause, some rising to their feet. The twins rushed forward and hugged them tightly. It was not just a proposal, it was a restoration. The next day, newspapers screamed Chiamaka to marry the millionaire she lost, a real-life Nollywood story. From beggar to bride, Chiamaka's fairy tale continues. They tried to silence her. Now the world is listening. And yet, behind all the glamour, the couple quietly prepared for something more profound than a wedding. They began organizing a foundation, the Chiamaka Foundation for Missing Women and Street Mothers, dedicated to helping women who had suffered abandonment, trafficking, and violence. One afternoon, as they visited the site for the future shelter, Obinna pulled her aside. "There's one last thing," he said. He led her to a large wall covered with graffiti, street children's art. There, in bold letters, a mural had been painted. "To the woman who came back stronger," signed by orphans and displaced women. Chiamaka stared at the wall and let the tears come. "Obinna," she whispered, "I used to think survival was enough. But now I understand. Healing is louder." Preparations for the wedding of the year were underway. Event planners scrambled to outdo themselves. Designers competed to style the bride, and journalists camped outside Obinna's mansion hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman whose story had shaken a nation. But while Enugu buzzed with excitement, Obinna and Chiamaka lived in the quiet center of a storm they knew hadn't yet passed. Because evil does not vanish with applause, it regroups. It began subtly. First, a break-in attempt at the Chiamaka Foundation's temporary office in a Kara layout. Then anonymous messages delivered to the gate. The staff, most of them former street mothers, grew anxious. Then came the chilling sign, a small brown envelope placed directly in Chiamaka's handbag while she spoke at a charity gala in Aka. Inside was a single item, a faded photo of her from the bush camp, taken without her knowledge, and 3 words, "We remember you." Obinna brought in more private security. His mansion became a fortress. The children's school was placed under discreet surveillance. Barrister Madhu, now both legal counsel and trusted ally, urged them to speak to federal authorities, but Chiamaka refused to back down. "If I hide now," she said firmly, "I teach my sons that truth is dangerous and silence is safety. That's not what I want them to learn." Obinna admired her courage, but it filled him with dread. The threats only deepened the bond between them. Late. At night they would sit on the balcony sipping millet drink, watching the stars over Enugu. "Do you ever regret coming back?" Obinna asked her one night. She turned and looked at him, her gaze soft but steady. "I never left, Obinna," she replied. "My body was taken, yes, but my heart, it was always with you." He reached for her hand. "Then let's fight for that heart." The wedding day arrived under the brightest sky the city had seen in weeks. Held at the iconic Michael Okpara Square, the guest list included governors, celebrities, and community leaders, but the most honored guests were women from shelters across the region, survivors like Chiamaka. She wore a breathtaking ivory dress, hand-embroidered by village women. Her gown was styled high, her earrings modest, her eyes glowing with quiet victory. The twins walked her down the aisle. Obinna waited, eyes misty, heart full. The vows were simple but thunderous. "I don't just marry you, Chiamaka. I honor the roads that broke you and the courage that rebuilt you. And I don't just love you, Obinna. I trust you, with the stories I never told and the children I raised in silence." As they kissed, the crowd erupted. It was more than a wedding. It was a celebration of survival. But even amidst joy, the shadows lingered. Later that evening, Obinna was handed a confidential folder from one of his investigators. Inside were names, locations, and proof. A powerful senator had been funding the same criminal network that had once held Chiamaka. The evidence was damning. Barrister Madhu reviewed it the next day. "This is enough to bring down a government. Official," he said, looking grim. "But it's also enough to get you both killed." Obinna leaned back, jaw tight. "What do we do?" Chiamaka, now a woman transformed, answered before the lawyer could. "We go public." The following week, during a live television interview on Channels TV, Chiamaka did the unthinkable. She named the senator. She named the locations. She named the forgotten girls still missing. By name, one by one. "This isn't about me anymore," she said to a stunned nation. "It's about every woman who never came back. We demand accountability." The aftermath was seismic. Investigations were launched. The senator was arrested and denied bail. International media picked up the story. Street protests broke out in several states, demanding justice for all trafficked women. For the first time, in years, Nigeria listened to its women. Chiamaka became a symbol, not of pity but of power. At home, things were quieter. The boys thrived in school, proud of their mother. Obinna resumed business, but his priorities had shifted. Family first, purpose second, wealth last. One evening, Chiamaka found him in the garden planting orange trees with the twins. "Why oranges?" she asked. Obinna smiled. "Because they're sweet, but they take time, like us." 6 months after her historic interview, Chiamaka Okafor became a household name across Nigeria and parts of Africa. Universities invited her to speak. Radio hosts played her voice on air every morning. Newspapers ran weekly columns chronicling her journey from forest captivity to social justice warrior. But nothing prepared her for what came next. The president's office formally invited her to Aso Rock. Inside the grand halls of Nigeria's most powerful building, Chiamaka stood before a panel of ministers, foreign dignitaries, and women's rights activists from around Africa. Her foundation's work, rescuing displaced women, rehabilitating abandoned mothers and tracing missing girls, had now gained international attention. Obinna stood silently behind her, proud and alert. Beside him sat the twins, dressed in black native suits, their eyes fixed on their mother. President Adeyemi, a stern but forward-thinking leader, rose to address the hall. In a country where silence often buries truth, he said, this woman chose to scream. In a land where shame is the weapon used to silence women, she built armor out of pain. For this and for her relentless service to the voiceless, the Federal Republic of Nigeria recognizes Mrs. Chiamaka Okafor with the title of National Heroine for Social Justice and Reform. A thunderous applause erupted. The national anthem was sung. Chiamaka, holding back tears, received a Medal of Honor, not just for herself but for every broken woman who ever begged on a street, invisible to the world. But with praise came scrutiny. Some questioned how a former beggar had risen so fast. Others accused her of seeking political relevance. One evening, during a live interview on Arise News, a journalist asked her bluntly, "Some say you're using your story for fame. What do you say to that?" Chiamaka did not flinch. "I say let them walk barefoot with 2 children for 5 years. Let them be raped by warlords. Let them eat from dustbins and sleep under bridges. If they can survive that and still have the strength to help others, then maybe they too can wear a medal. Until then, they can keep their opinions." The clip went viral, not just in Nigeria, but globally. Despite the chaos and criticism, her relationship with Obinna blossomed. He no longer saw himself as just the man who found her. He was now her partner in rebuilding a nation. They bought land in Nsukka to build the first rehabilitation village for trafficked women in West Africa. Not a shelter, but a full community. Houses, clinics, schools, and farms. Obinna used his wealth. Chiamaka used her voice, and the people listened. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through the land under construction, Chiamaka stopped beneath a tall mango tree. "This tree reminds me of the one near the camp," she said. "I used to sit beneath it and pray, not for rescue, but for peace." Obinna looked at her. "Did you ever think you'd live to see peace?" She smiled softly. "No, but I never stopped planting the seeds for it. But peace, like all things, good, does not come easily." One morning, their lead field officer, Ngozi, arrived in tears. A rescue mission in Kogi State had gone wrong. A trafficker had slipped through the cracks, and 2 teenage girls had disappeared again, likely sold. Across the border, Chiamaka was furious. "These girls are not numbers. They are not projects, they are people," she cried during an emergency meeting. Barrister Madhu leaned forward. "You've become a threat to the entire trafficking network, Chiamaka. They are watching you." "Then let them watch," she snapped. "But they will also watch us win." The twins, now 8 years old, started writing journals in school. One day, Ebuka shared a story he wrote. "My mummy is a warrior. When people hurt girls, she fights them. One day, I will be like her." Obinna. Read it silently. Then he hugged the boy tightly, saying, "You already are, my son." By the end of the year, Chiamaka had been nominated for the Africa Women's Peace Award. The nomination alone brought tears to her eyes. But more than any award, it was the call she received that night that shook her deeply. A woman, rescued by the foundation in Lagos, revealed shocking intel. One of the original kidnappers who took Chiamaka years ago was still alive, and he wanted to speak to her. The man's name was Zubairu Musa, a ghost from Chiamaka's darkest days, one of the traffickers who had once overseen her captivity in the wilderness of Borno State, a name she had forced herself to forget, until now. But according to the intel from a rescued girl in Lagos, Zubairu had surfaced again, operating quietly in Abuja under the guise of a local transporter. And now, he wanted to speak with her. Obinna was against it. "Let the police handle it," he said, pacing, in their living room. "You don't need to face him." Chiamaka sat quietly, her hands clasped together, her face unreadable. "I need to look him in the eye," she finally said. "I need to hear why, and I need him to see what I became." Obinna looked at her, the woman who had once been voiceless and afraid. But now, she was fire. "Then I'm going with you." The meeting was set in a high-security interrogation room at the EFCC's Abuja headquarters. Behind a glass wall, law enforcement watched closely. Cameras rolled, tension filled the air. Zubairu was brought in, thinner than she remembered, grayer, weaker. But the face, that face could never be forgotten. He looked up. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, time stopped. Chiamaka stepped forward. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, voice steady. Zubairu smirked. "The woman who made noise on TV." Wrong answer. Chiamaka walked closer. "I am the woman you and your dogs broke, the woman you caged, the woman you thought would die." Zubairu blinked, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. "I survived, and I thrived, and now I'm going to bury the entire system you worked for." He scoffed. "You think the world cares about girls like you?" She stepped even closer. "I don't need the world to care. I care. And I've built an army of women who care. And together, we are coming for all of you." For the first time, Zubairu looked afraid. And when Chiamaka turned and walked out, she didn't just leave that room. She closed a chapter of her life with her head held high. In the following weeks, Zubairu's arrest led to a domino effect. Using the evidence gathered from his interrogation, Nigerian authorities, and with help from Interpol, dismantled a trafficking chain that stretched from Maiduguri to Niamey to Libya. Over 150 women and children were rescued. 5 politicians, 3 soldiers, and several border officials were implicated. It was the largest anti-trafficking crackdown in West African history, and at the center of it all was a former beggar, now a queen. The story made international news. Chiamaka was interviewed by the BBC, CNN, and Al Jazeera. She received standing ovations at the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa. The United Nations offered her an advisory role on women's protection. Yet, through it all, she remained grounded. Still the girl who once sold plantain by the roadside. Still the mother who told bedtime stories to her sons. Still the woman who had once begged on her knees but now stood on stages. 1 year later, in a quiet ceremony attended by rescued survivors, Obinna and Chiamaka cut the ribbon to open the Chiamaka village for rebirth in Nsukka. A sanctuary built not just with money, but with love. Each building was named after a woman who never made it home. As the sun set, Obinna took her hand and led her to the center of the courtyard, where a marble plaque had been unveiled. It read, "To the woman who became a river of hope after surviving fire." Chiamaka stared at the words. Tears slid down her cheeks. "I don't deserve all this," she whispered. Obinna looked at her, then at the crowd of smiling women and laughing children. "Yes, you do. And more." That night, as they sat on their veranda with the twins asleep, inside Chiamaka looked up at the stars. "I used to dream of freedom," she said. "Now I dream of legacy." Obinna put his arm around her shoulders. "And you've built it, my love. Brick by brick, soul by soul." They sat in silence for a while. Then, almost as if the wind itself were whispering, Chiamaka said, "Let them remember me. Not as the woman who was broken, but as the woman who broke the silence." And beneath the African moon, with love beside, her and the world finally listening, Chiamaka smiled, because her story was not one of tragedy, it was one of triumph.